Everyone hits a bump in the road. What do you do with it? Be inspired as we explore the ways people experience, navigate, and manage the ups and downs and twists and turns in this road trip called life. This is a rather different bump in the road. I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico, a tourist destination at 7,200 feet at the foot of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. Here, COVID is more than a bump in the road for the many artisans, restaurants, and shops that depend on tourism for a living. Many of them are just hanging on by a thread, and there is no way to know if that proverbial light at the end of the tunnel is an oncoming train or perhaps some economic hope. This episode looks at the New Mexico restaurant industry and the impact that COVID has had. First, I speak with Carol Wight from the New Mexico Restaurant Association to get a statewide overview of the crisis. Then, in part two, Janice Argabright and Wayne Moore join me to share their experiences as restaurateurs. Janice is part of a New Mexico legacy, the Owl Barn Cafe, which was founded by her grandfather. Wayne works for Lescombes Vineyards, which traces its roots back several generations to a wine operation in France. They currently farm a 400-acre vineyard near Deming, New Mexico. Have a tissue handy. This is a tough interview. Carol, welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on today. If you would, give us a little bit of perspective on what's been happening in New Mexico and specifically in the New Mexican restaurant industry vis-a-vis COVID-19.
So it's interesting, obviously we were shut down in March and lived through that. We were reopened on June 1st, and then we were shut down again on July 13th. And so we are one of 3 states in the nation that are shut down for indoor dining and the other 2 are New Jersey and California. So that's where we are today, and there's a lot of hopelessness in the industry.
Talk about that a little bit. I know I've been talking to restaurateurs, small shop owners, and there is just a terrible sense of despair. Everybody's distraught. They don't know what's happening. What's going on with restaurateurs?
Well, we're just not getting any signals from the governor that she's going to be opening us up anytime soon. And I think that does create a lot of despair when people don't know how to plan their lives. Obviously, what we were trying to do in the first place is that we were being good citizens, and the goal was to flatten the curve. That was the first goal. We flattened the curve, and then we keep being given different goals. So, and the governor keeps making up things. We reach all of her gating criteria, and then she adds another gating criteria, and so we're again, the despair and the helplessness is just rampant right now. Nobody knows where we're going with this. And obviously, we know that COVID is a very concerning virus, and we've got to be very careful about how we handle things. Restaurants have been in the forefront of doing all of the right things. For one thing, we all have food safety training, and we've got to have that in New Mexico in order to have a restaurant. You have to have somebody on site that has food safety training. All of our employees have food handler cards, so they're versed in sanitation and disinfection and things like that to keep our customers and our employees safe. So, and then you layer on, now we've got COVID safe practices that we have been layering into what we do. And as a matter of fact, I was on a webinar the other day with the CDC, and they said, you don't necessarily have to do all of the things that this CDC says, but as many layers as you can put on of, mask wearing and social distancing and, things like that are those COVID safe practices. The more layers you can put on, the more safe the general public and your employees will be. So, so that's something we've been doing, and we've been doing it for years and years, and now we have a few more layers of those things. It's not hard for restaurants to do that. We can do that. And we have been doing that. So we don't understand why our governor would be one of 47 other governors have figured out how to open up restaurants, and New Mexico can't quite figure that out.
There's a sense in the restaurant industry that it's been singled out in a way. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. Without explanation, she singled us out, which we have a lawsuit right now that's going to be coming up in the Supreme Court next week. And that lawsuit basically says that the governor is being arbitrary and capricious in her choices. And that goes all the way down to the retail sector as well. She, with opening up the big box stores and not allowing small stores to open, even with different capacities, those kind of things just show that it was completely arbitrary. There's really no science behind it. We have been asking for the data and the science behind her decisions since she started making the decisions, and they will not share that. And that means that there's something wrong there if you're not willing to share the science with the people who are being affected by it.
No, it's not just the restaurant industry either. I mean, all the suppliers are impacted too.
Oh, one of my biggest heartfelt moments was when one of my board members called me up and said, "I've lost my job." And he's in the supplier business, and he's been there for, I think, 15 years. And, obviously the other heartfelt moments were when I was listening to restaurateurs talk about the hundreds of people they had to lay off. I mean, that obviously, 35,000 employees that are not working right now and possibly not going to have jobs to go back to if we don't get open very soon. But yeah, so it's across the spectrum. It's not just restaurants. It's the whole food service industry in New Mexico.
Now, I'm in Santa Fe, which is a bit of an island relative to a lot of New Mexico, but we're almost entirely dependent on tourism. What do you hear from the New Mexico restaurants up here in Santa Fe, where the tours are gone, the locals may or may not be eating out, and nobody knows what the future holds?
Well, I have to say, I think your mayor is being brilliant because he's really proactively dealing with this. He's he figured out early on that you guys are dependent on tourism, and therefore he's going to make sure and cut back on services from the city just because he's not going to be able to pay for it if he doesn't have the money from tourism. And, I'll remind people that in New Mexico, our gross receipts tax is charged on restaurant meals, but it is not charged on groceries. And so places like Santa Fe that are dependent on tourism, you've got a lot of people eating at grocery stores, but you don't have any gross receipts tax coming in because that those are exempt from gross receipts.
Restaurants are a really low margin business. As a matter of fact, I've heard numbers that it's about a 5% margin business, which really stunned me. One, what are the margins, and how does a restaurant manage to weather month after month of being closed? I mean, from a financial perspective.
I think some restaurants they're hanging by a thread. They've used up all their savings. They've used up all of their payroll protection loans. They may have an idle loan or some other loan out there, but they're having to pay those back on a regular basis, and they don't have the money to do that. I thought it was interesting that the governor and the state came up with these loans from the finance authority, and it's over $100 million in loans, but the loans are 4-year loans at a very low interest rate, but you've got to pay them back in 4 years. And we don't really expect to be out of this as far as restaurants go in the next 4 years. And just to reiterate what you said about the margins in restaurants, a restaurant's doing really well if it can bottom line 10%, and that's before taxes. Most restaurants in New Mexico are probably making around 5%. That means, and the other thing about this is, and you got to think about this, is that 95% of those sales go back into the community through payroll, through suppliers, through other things. So and then if there's 5% left in those local restaurants, that restaurateur is living there in the community and putting it back into the community. So it's not a big money making venture. If anybody gets into the restaurant industry to make money, good luck. But they say there's an old joke, how do you make $1 million in a restaurant? And the answer to that is you start with 2. And you may end up with 1, but more likely you end up with nothing. And right now, I think there's so many restaurants. One of the webinars we're going to do upcoming is how to file for bankruptcy and save your restaurant. And that is heartbreaking that we would have to have those kind of webinars for our members. We've done a lot to help them get their PPP loans, to help them, navigate the Small Business Administration and some of the CARES Act and the FFCRA Act and things like that. So, it's a crazy time right now for restaurants, and I can't even imagine having to make the decisions they're making.
How does one navigate bankruptcy as a restaurant?
I'm not a lawyer. And I think part of it is, deciding which kind of bankruptcy, do you file for Chapter 7, Chapter 11? And honestly, I don't even know too much about that. What we do when we do webinars for folks is we'll bring in a lawyer that is a bankruptcy lawyer and an expert on that. So, and give them that expert advice.
Yeah, because it seems to me, even if you could go through bankruptcy, save some of your assets with the idea you might be able to open again in the future. And again, I'm not a lawyer either. There's so much chance and risk right now in not knowing what the future holds. How does one try to make plans to say, I'll reopen in a year or 18 months? Is that even doable?
So I'm kind of likening it to opening a brand new restaurant. So when you open a restaurant, usually you have some capital behind you that you live on, because it's hard to get your controls underfoot in the first 2 or 3 years. So you have some extra capital from whatever loans you took out or from your life savings that you saved to open up a restaurant. But right now, that's my fear, is that these folks don't have that
That reserve, that financial
backup,
yeah.
the reserve, right, and yeah. So they don't have that to continue. So they're almost like opening up a new restaurant without any reserves. And, again, there's a saying in the restaurant industry, for every 5 restaurants that open, 4 will close in the first 5 years. And so I think we've got that and I don't want to say look forward to, but I think that's what we're going to be looking
Now,
at.
some restaurants are very innovative and they're pivoting into different business models. Have you seen any business models that kind of catch your eye? And where do you think that this will lead in terms of the future of the local restaurant industry?
So I've heard from a lot of restaurants that are like, why didn't I put in a drive-through window, right? That's just like, because the restaurants that have drive-throughs are doing fairly well right now. That's where people feel safe going out to eat, and that's where the governor has allowed us to be open, and just the convenience of having a drive-through rather than having to stop and take out from someplace is interesting. A couple of restaurants have put in drive-through windows, number one. Number two, I have heard of some rural restaurants that have put in small grocery areas in their restaurant, and they're doing very well. As a matter of fact, I talked to one in Tucumcari a couple of weeks ago, and she said, Carol, we will never not do groceries again. She said that this is a part of what we will continue to do, because in those rural areas, I mean, think about it, they don't have a lot of grocery capability. Number one. Number two, for a while there, they couldn't get toilet paper in grocery stores, but we had suppliers that supply to restaurants that did have toilet paper. So we were able to get toilet paper when grocery stores were not. And same with disinfecting. I mean, we have warehouses full of disinfecting solutions, et cetera. They're in gallon bottles. They're in restaurant packs, but people, that's really what people were looking for is just give me the way to disinfect my home. And so I think that's another way people have pivoted, is having small grocery stores, grocery capabilities. And then you think about, one other thing, there are, especially in New Mexico, we have what they call food deserts. And what that is where a place where you really can't get fresh food. You can't get fresh produce anywhere. The closest place to you might be a convenience store, and they might have some lemons and limes and a few other things, but they're not going to have a big grocery section with fresh produce. So all the grocery stores have gone out of business. There's one Walmart, but it's, 50 miles away. And so I think restaurants are seeing that they're more rural, they're more spread out, and they can be this kind of grocery, fresh produce place for people in their communities.
And what about fine dining? Where is that going to go?
So I was asked the other day something along these lines, and if you think about it, I mean, fine dining is the one that's really suffering right now because they can't do indoor dining. The thought of bringing home a $32 steak and eating it from a cardboard and or foam box, just, that's a hard one. So a lot of them have shut down. A lot of them are trying to wait this out rather than try to bend over backwards and be something different than they are. So again, though, they've got bills that are ongoing, and this is the problem, is that they've got their overhead, utilities, rent, other costs that, insurance, other things that don't stop. Even if they close their doors, those things don't stop. And therefore, they've got to have some kind of income coming in, or they've got to have deep pockets.
I don't think any of us know how this is going to evolve, but what I'd love to do is in a year or so, regroup, get together again, and talk a little bit about how far we've come, hopefully in a really good way, and where things are going again, because I think this will have a long-term impact on how we view restaurants, how restaurants view their customers. I think this is a game changer for an American public that spends a lot of money eating out.
I do too. And if you think about it, last February, restaurants were 50% of the food dollar. So people were spending about half of their money in restaurants and half at grocery stores. Obviously, that's changed. I don't have the exact numbers, but it's significantly less. It took us a long time to get to that point, where people were spending that much money in restaurants. And so we'll see where the new frontier takes us. But I think there's going to be a lot of pent-up demand. I think people are really going to want to eat in restaurants when this all is over. And who knows when that will be. Hopefully the pent-up demand will bring back restaurants in a way that they were prior to this virus taking
I think
over.
we all miss our local restaurants. We miss getting together. We miss socializing. We miss it all. And I think that when everything reopens, we should all make it a point to put dining out first on our must-do list.
Well, I certainly hope so. And I think travel is going to be one of those things as well. I mean, I think it's very hard, at least for me, not to go somewhere, right? I really want to travel. And honestly, my husband and I have been getting out in New Mexico a lot. But, we have kids spread out across the country, and we're really dying to go see them and be with them. So, and I think other people feel that way. And obviously in Santa Fe, you guys do rely on tourism and tourists. I actually was going to bring a big group to Santa Fe this summer, and we have plans to bring the group next summer. So fingers crossed we're all over this and we can get back to some of the travel that we've been used to doing over the last few years.
Hear, hear, to travel, to restaurants, and to having fun again.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you for joining us today. I hope you found something in today's podcast that inspires you along your own life path, because sometimes a bump in the road is actually a portal into a more conscious and meaningful life. Bump in the Road is a production of Cancer Road Trip. Subscribe to the podcast, follow us on social media at Cancer Road Trip, and you can learn more at www.cancerroadtrip.com. Until next time, be safe and be well.